Hola, Kules. We're back again with another episode of Offside after a long hiatus. We got caught up in the middle, launched our audio podcast, which some of you might have heard, and that took a little time away. And we got also a little bit busy. So sorry for the long absence. But we're back. But before I go any further, let me welcome Dom. Dom, good to have you back on video after a long time.
Hi, Dev. So we are very happy to be back and reporting it on Barca again and maybe shedding some light on some issues that they have, of which there are plenty at the moment.
Yes, we have a lot of issues, and today we decided to double down on one of them, which is on paper, our midfield looks stacked. But if you look at how the team's been performing lately, at least for the last 2 months, it would seem that we don't have a functioning midfield, to be entirely honest, something that connects the offense with the defense and something actually that dictates the tempo of the game and controls on how the team plays. And this has been a consistent problem for a while. And we decided to take a deeper look into it, which is what we will cover in today's episode.
The midfield, it doesn't lack quality. That's not the problem. But it's just how do you assemble? How do you structure it so that you get the optimal balance of all profiles? And how does Xavi make sure that all of those profiles gel well and produce what they have to produce?
So what I've done is I've taken stats from the last 5 games played by each of our midfielders, and I've also taken Cancelo to look into because Xavi's trying to use him in that 4-box midfield, and he has freedom to roam about. He's not strictly adhering to that right back role. So I've taken all those stats, and what we have looked into is their pass combination and who's providing what kind of impetus in the build-up play, right? And then from there, we'll cut back into the formations where we'll go to Dom and he will talk about, from a formation standpoint, what seems to be lacking. And hopefully that will shed some light into where the problems are. All right. As you can see, there are 5 players. There's Pedri, Gundogan, Romeo, Frenkie de Jong, and Cancelo. And what I've done is I've taken the number of touches taken by them in the last 5 games in La Liga that each has played. And they've had injuries. So Frenkie de Jong had injuries, Pedri had injuries, but we have taken the last 5 games that they actually played. And it's an interesting stat if you look into it. Like Pedri's done about 300 touches. Gundogan slightly higher at 414. Romeo, we talked about him as a band-aid. So it feels like he's acting like a band-aid, but 175 in his position for this team seems to be low. And then we have Frenkie de Jong. No surprises here. He loves to run with the ball. So obviously his numbers are high. And then we'll look into what that translates into.
Yeah, I think these stats tell us about the roles each of these players have in Xavi's current system. So we always have a double pivot of some sort, right? So there's always 2 players at the base of that midfield. And I think Gundo and Frenkie are often there and involved in the build-up the most. And that reflects in the stats as well. Pedri, yeah, you would expect him to be more involved. You would expect him to be even the player with maybe the highest number of touches, but he is not, simply because he's been given this role that's higher up, sometimes even reflects the number 10 role, if you will, where he has the freedom in the final third and he is more responsible for the attacking output and connecting the midfield to the forwards a bit more than just participating in the build-up, which is what Gundogan and Frenkie do most, and that is reflected in these stats especially. Now, Romeo, yes, we know that he is someone who has certain flaws on the ball in possession, so I think the system is designed in such a way that it doesn't put too much responsibility on his shoulders in possession, but at the same time, it's the opposition's doing as well, because they know that if they mark him out of the game, if they put a marker on his back constantly and put pressure on him, he cannot really receive in those situations and be a reliable piece in the build-up. So that he's often skipped or he's marked out of the game. So that's why his touches are on the lower end. And Cancelo, then we said this a long time ago when we analyzed Cancelo. He is a right back on paper, but what he does, he inverts it. He plays as an interior. And as such, he is very involved in everything Barcelona do from the build-up to creation. And that's why his touches are on par with Pedri and even Gundogan and higher than Romeo. So I think these stats very much reflect what we see in the system in terms of roles these players have been given.
I would just like to make a small point on this. We have a coach like Xavi, and small trivia, but when Xavi was playing, his average number of touches in every game was over 100. Here we have people who have about 60 to 50. So you can see the transition that has happened, and that is reflected in the way that we play. And it's sad that with Xavi as our coach, we do not have players who average 100 touches a game while controlling that midfield engine. So then I looked into XG, and now they're not necessarily supposed to create goal scoring threat from that perspective, but it also shows that there is so less support that the forward line gets. Our forward line is anyways struggling. But if you look at the output that's coming from Cancelo or Pedri, who has been given the responsibility of creating more attacking threat, the numbers just don't stack up. On the contrary, for Gundogan, who can be a higher up player, which the role that he played in City very well, he's also not providing. So now we have 7 people out of the 11 that we have who are not really contributing that much from a goal threat perspective or even creating that chance, even though as a composite, we are creating a lot of chances. But these numbers do tell a story.
Yeah, you're right. I think these stats tell a very good story, again, of profiles and roles. And you're right. You're right. Gundogan is someone who can contribute much more in attack, but he is being used in a slightly deeper role next to Frenkie de Jong. And that's the result of Romeo struggling and Barcelona just not being able to get the ball effectively from the first to the second phase. So Xavi has resorted to putting Gundogan deeper to assist Frenkie and help the ball move forward. And Pedri, on the other hand, has been given this role where he's in the final third a lot. He has the freedom to move across the final third from left to right and attack the box and be that attacking presence alongside the forwards that we have. However, so far, it needs to be said, and we've talked about this in our podcast as well. If Pedri is given this number 10 role, it just feels like he needs to be providing a bit more. Now, 0.2 XG across 5 games, it's not a bad return, but we've not really don't really see it in the actual goals, in the actual output, or the assist for that matter. So I think, well, these underlying numbers like XG, they're not necessarily bad or drastically bad, but we need to see more from Pedri if he's going to be that number 10, that player who needs the output. Yes, he can be the creative cog in the final third. He can be the one that connects the pieces. That's absolutely fine. But if we're not getting more of that incentive, more of that aggression and initiative for Pedri, then I would rather have him in his more traditional number 8 role on the right side or on the left side, whichever Charlie prefers, where he can be a build-up influence, a progression tool, but doesn't have that much responsibility in terms of attacking output.
Let's move into assists. And the picture is more or less similar here, as you can see. Again, not much of support in terms of assist creation as well from our midfield into our offense, which makes life difficult for everyone. And again, I would say if you look into Cancelo, 0.04, I would assume that for a right back with his skill sets and what we expected from him, right, it would be far more than this. Pedri, for sure, with his role in this current system, is doing what he's doing. But overall, if you look into as an engine output, there's not much in terms of assistance that is being created for the forward line, it would seem from the data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. And it feels very wrong to criticize Pedri in particular because we know how important he is. We know how good he is. And saying that his output as a 10 is lacking is not really a criticism of his quality because we know what he is. We know what he can be. We know that he's important. But we've just not seen it in this role because this role has different requirements of every player. And now, not every player, not every profile will fit that role perfectly. And Pedri can be that because if we cast our mind back to the early days of Xavi, he kept saying that Pedri needs more goals in his game. And Pedri himself kept saying that, okay, I will put a goal for this season to score X, Y, or Z number of goals. So we know that Xavi wants Pedri to be able to perform this role, but we're just not seeing it yet. Doesn't mean that he won't become a good option for that role, but at the moment, it's still not there. It's not enough. It's not enough for this Barcelona because we need more from such a very important role because number 10 in this system has a lot of responsibility. It's always been that way throughout the years, and it's just the way it is. So if Pedri is to continue performing this role, he'll need to do more because 0.32, again, not bad, but I just feel like someone like Gundo, for example, in that role would do more. for example. And then Cancelo, again, as you said it, if we buy a player who is known for his output in terms of assists and chance creation, we need more than 0.04. We just need more.
Are we using the players to their strengths, which you often talk about, we talked about in our podcast as well? Okay, let's keep going. Now, this is completed passes. And again, I was very surprised with Pedri's number because one would assume that with his skill set, that number would be higher. This is across 5 games. So imagine it's about 50 passes per game average, not even 50, 40, 42, 43, something like that, that he's averaging, which means he's not involved in the game, right? And that has been something that has been discussed often on social media or forums that if you use Pedri in that manner, then he doesn't get to see the ball. And if he doesn't get to see the ball, then he can't influence the game, right?
Yeah, it's a problem. It's a big problem because players like Pedri and Frenkie de Jong, for example, they are players whose quality is best seen when they are in possession of the ball, as you said. So he needs to be on the ball to do the most damage or to maximize his profile. He can be this sort of off the ball threat and be the attacking outlet or whatnot, but it just doesn't really get the most out of him. So yes, in this role that he's been given, he's not in contact with the ball as much as he needs to be, and he's not seeing or dictating the play as much as he needs to be. Is it the best way to use Pedri? I don't think so. But at the same time, as we'll discuss further on in the tactics part, it just might be due to the circumstances and the context because we have underperforming players, we have players who are struggling in certain roles, and maybe at the moment this is the best that Xavi can put out. We'll see. I can't really say for sure, but it's not the best use of Pedri as of right now. It's as simple as that. And we can see that Gundo and Frenkie have much more passes, completed passes and touches. So that kind of gives you the idea of their roles, which are deeper and more influential in the build-up, where they get in contact with the ball much, much more. And that reflects in the stats.
And the final thing that I would say is Romeo. I know he's not Busquets, but he's playing in that Busquets position. And Busquets would not do 125 passes in 5 games. I'm not criticizing him, but the data would suggest that there's not much of output that is coming from Romeo in connecting ends with the offense. So we'll keep going. Pass completion. Again, here, I was very surprised with some numbers, especially again, Pedri. And this, I have noticed this time around, if you notice the games, he has been dispossessed much more than he was in his first 2 seasons or first 3 seasons. This is what I've felt, eye test, but the data seems to corroborate. But if you look into all of them, look at Cancelo's pass completion rate. Look at Gundogan's pass completion rate. We don't have anybody in the high 90s except Frenkie. For a Barca fit midfield, which has to play in that high line defense with those subtle triangles and very quick interchange of passes, this is a huge problem. So now, should we lay the blame on Xavi, or did we overhype the players that we've got?
I think it's also very important to mention that this data, as with all the others that we've just seen, is very reflective of the role. So Pedri is someone who, by the nature of his role, will play far more riskier passes than someone like Frenkie or Romeo, just because of the nature of that role where he has to create, he has to try to do something out of nothing, and that often requires much riskier actions, and that results in lower percentages because those riskier actions often also don't really get completed. Now, Cancelo, on the other hand, as well, he's meant to be the creator, so he's meant to put on those crosses, those through balls, those key passes, which often get intercepted or maybe they don't hit the target, and that's why you see these numbers decrease. Romeo, as you said, it's fair to criticize Romeo because in the first couple of games, he was good because his individual performance was on the required level. So he was still doing the same thing that he's doing now, only he was much more successful in those passes. Now he's sloppy and he loses the ball. He has these bad touches, heavy touches with controlling the ball. So it's much more individual than than anything else because in the beginning he was doing the same things, but he was far more successful as an individual player. And now he's just become sloppy. So it is fair to criticize him as well. Now, Gundogan and Frenkie, as I said, they're deeper. They're not really as creative in this role as much, so they are boasting higher percentages. And yes, as you said, generally speaking, across the midfield, it can be an issue if your players are not executing those actions as they're meant to be, and that's something that Xavi he can try and help them with the system, but it's something that they have to do on their own as individuals. They have to be able to perform those things because Xavi cannot help them to I don't know have better control of the ball or miss a simple pass that's short pass to their teammates. That's something that they have to do by themselves.
Let's keep going. Progressive passes. Now, obviously, passing is one thing, and then how many of these passes actually go to the final third. And there it shows our struggle, right? Across 5 games, these are the numbers: 32 from Pedri, 22 from Cancelo, 38 from Frenkie, 41 from Gundogan, and 19 from Romeo. With the kind of forward line that we have, this obviously is failing to provide that impetus or that relief in terms of breaking the block, as I would say. And that's where we are struggling.
Yes, exactly. Romeo, for example, in this graph, we can see his limitation, right? We can see why he needs help because he's not Busquets. He just isn't. And Frenkie de Jong and Gundo, again, build up phase. They are the progressors. And Frenkie obviously prefers to carry as opposed to pass. And we can actually see the similarity between Pedri and Frenkie because they excel at very similar things. And I think we'll see that as we go on as well in more data. They like to do similar things and they are geared, their profiles are specialized in very similar things. So having one in his preferred role will always limit the other one. So that's the issue that Xavi is facing here. And Gundogan, again, he's very effective at this. Whether this number is enough or not, that's a different story. But this does show that he is in Barca's midfield, that he can do that task properly. Now, Cancelo, on the other hand, is he meant to be the progressor? I would say so, yes, especially if he's inverting into that midfield and having a deeper presence and then having a lot of the ball as well. Then maybe, yeah, that number should be a bit higher. But when we discuss the stats, just the stats, not the eye test, it feels like Cancelo's output is still not where it's meant to be in any of those categories that he needs to excel in.
I would completely agree with you. Then I looked into progressive carries because obviously that matters. And then again, you can see the numbers. Now we have good carries from Cancelo, so at least in one of them he's doing better than most of the other people who have been compared on this graph, where we seem to completely run out of ideas on how to break an opposition block or even how to create goal scoring chances.
And again, these stats again tell me the similar story. Pedri and Frenkie again like to do similar things. They carry the ball, so Pedri is put in a situation where he cannot really do what he likes to do, and that's a problem as well. Romeo again, not really his thing. Progression is not really what he does best. He likes to be much more simple than that. He likes to recycle the ball, retain the ball, and then be that shield in a very limited area because he cannot really cover large spaces effectively. So it's a mixed bag here. Cancelo, again, yes, maybe he's doing the carries, but those carries are not exactly translated to something that they need to translate. So they're not threatening carries and they're not really chance creation carries. So what are they? That's the question. Yeah, I would still say these stats are they paint a fairly accurate picture of our issues on the pitch again.
So then what I did, I looked into the pass combination map from Y-Scout into 3 of our last games, like Real Sociedad, and then we look into Alaves, and then we looked into Rayo, right? So that's the 3 games that I've taken. But what I wanted to show here, and again, I would like to point out at Pedri, 38, he played only that much, but look at the number of combinations that he has had. Then you look into Gundogan, the number of combinations that he has had throughout the game. Then you look at Joao Cancelo, and it's continual, right? It's not just this game. This was obviously in this game we knew we were completely played out of the park. Now we go into Alaves, slightly better because in the second half we put in that effort and we came back from the deficit and we scored 2 goals, and it shows that number.
Yeah, it's a problem because essentially what this boils down, you want to have in every game, you want to have your most influential and best players interact with each other the most. So when Barca have Gundogan and Pedri interacting a lot, that's always a positive thing.
If the positions are defined, Dom, and they have a defined role, then you would want to see, you would expect to see the same kind of combinations in every game, but you don't see that. It's completely different from game to game. No wonder we feel toothless in either attack or midfield, bereft of ideas and in trying to solve for or even play anything remotely like what Barca are accustomed to be playing. And then finally, the Rio game, and this is what that looks like. So two of our most creative players were completely shut out in the Rio game.
And that's an issue. That's an issue if you don't have those connections. Your best players don't find ways to interact with each other, and not just interact with each other for the sake of it. It has to be valuable. It has to be meaningful interactions in good areas. But if the structure isn't designed that way, where those players can interact in a nice way, they know where they are and where their links will be, when they can pass, they can pass, that's a problem. And that creates confusion. You have to create an environment that emphasizes those players' strengths and helps them interact with each other far easier.
I think we have to accept that there's a system issue out there, which is hampering our efficacy to an extent, that I would say. And then finally, we still probably do not have a very clear idea. And now we'll pass it back to Dom to take us through the tactical analysis. And over to you, Dom.
Now, what we're going to do here is basically we're going to look at midfield combinations and see what would Xavi's best choices for this midfield be. Now, before I go into the formations and the systems and the combinations that Xavi can do, it's very important to understand what kind of players we're actually dealing with. So we have 5 midfielders. I've put them all on the pitch just for the sake of the argument here. So we have Pedri, Frenkie, Gundogan, Fermin, and Romeo. Of course, Cancelo, as we said, can be a midfielder and interior, but just for now, we'll leave him out and put him right on the side as right back, and then we'll discuss him a bit later. So in terms of these profiles, we have Pedri, who naturally is a number 8, right? He's someone who's a creative passer and someone who's a progressor, right? So maybe those two things, he's more than that, but when it comes down to it, he's a progressor and he's a creator. Frenkie de Jong, basically the same thing, a progressor and a creator. He has that in him to make the final pass, even though he's been criticized for it a lot over the years. But he's also a big carrier of the ball, which is a defining trait of his. Romeo is the number 6. He's more of a dueler, more of a recycler and a retainer of the ball. He, in this squad, sadly, is quite unique, and we'll touch upon that later. Now, Gundo and Fermin, I've put them in the same category because those are the players with attacking instincts. Now, Gundogan is much more than that. He can be whatever you need him to be. He can be a recycler. He can be a progressor. He can be a creator. He can be a forward if you want him to be the forward. So he is much more of a complete profile, but just for the sake of the argument here, we have him alongside Fermin, who is also someone with great ball striking, someone who has that attacking instinct in him. So that's why I've put him in this category right here. Now, this setup would be the ideal setup in terms of profiles Barcelona have. Now, what I mean by this is that it's not the best players on the pitch. So I would move Fermin out of the way, and I would move Pedri out of the way. And people would say, okay, that's very controversial now because Pedri is not in the lineup. How is that possible? But this is purely in terms of profiles. Romeo is the only number 6. We know that, right? He's the only single pivot available, but due to his limitations, we can't really have a single pivot. We needed the cushion, the support, and the balance of a double pivot, the protection of a double pivot. So whatever we do in this lineup, in this setup right here, the double pivot is the only real option. And in that double pivot, in terms of pure profiles, again, Romeo needs to start for the sake of the balance between verticality and horizontality. Romeo is someone who is very happy to be in this area right here and stay there, stay as a lighthouse. That's what they call these days. And Frenkie, as we know, is the vertical player who goes up and down the pitch and has the freedom to be the first receiver and then advance up the pitch. And he, in that sense, he is the ideal partner to this more static and horizontal Romeo, and he can play against the pressure. The reason I've not put Frenkie and Pedri in the same lineup, for example, if you put Pedri instead of Romeo, people would say, okay, let's put this and have your best players on the pitch at the same time. Yes, that's fair enough. But again, we discussed this in the stats as well. Pedri is also very similar to Frenkie. What he likes to do, he likes to carry the ball. He likes to be involved in almost every action on the pitch. He likes to be on the ball constantly. You need both Frenkie and Pedri on the ball at all times, involved in every single action, even to have the most out of their profiles. So that's why I wouldn't go with that. In terms of this double pivot, it could work potentially against lower level opposition where you can have them both go forward and occupy this area of the pitch alongside someone like Gundogan because you have enough technical quality and to dominate the opposition purely on that. Just in possession, dominate on the ball, be the superior players, superior team in possession, and have the security of in possession defending, so defending with the ball without the fear of that lower level of position actually hurting you in this scenario. Now, Gundogan, in terms of profiles, is a much better fit here than, for example, Pedri because of his attacking instincts. He can play, just put Romeo back here, he can play in this area in the final third. He can make the runs into the box if he needs to, or he has the final ball as well to play Felix in, to play Lamine or Rafinha in. He can be the attacking presence and he can offer you output that someone like Pedri cannot. It's very similar with Fermin Lopez, who has the ball striking, who can be a very threatening player from outside the box and inside the box because he moves really well. And the same goes for Gundogan as well. So in this situation, in terms of profiles, this is what you would go for. This is the ideal blend of profiles. Is it the best players on the pitch? I don't think so because we know that Romeo is struggling. We know that Pedri is not on the pitch and you need Pedri on the pitch because he is among Barcelona's best players. But this is what will happen. So if you want to have both Pedri and Frenkie on the pitch, what you need is you need a much better number 6, someone who's at a higher level, who can be the linchpin behind them, who can be the shield behind them, who can be the horizontal nature and the static nature, who doesn't mind staying in this position right here and basically shielding these two players who now in this scenario get much more freedom and much more impetus to attack and be in their preferred roles on the pitch. So now you have Frenkie, who can still retain his Stones role, if you will. He can still drop all the way deep and he can still go all the way up. And you have Pedri in the number 8 role. And basically what he does, he can still be effective in this whole corridor right here without actually losing anything because you have the number 6 behind him who can provide what Romeo unfortunately cannot provide at the moment. So this is the ideal blend of profiles. It's not the ideal blend of quality, mind you, because this number 6 is just not at the level that it needs to be at the moment. And Barcelona don't have the leisure of playing with a single pivot just now. And that's what we see double pivot in an ideal so-called profile situations.
When you dissect the problem from a profile standpoint and not by names, it does force you to think from a different point of view. And you can see the problem in a much more clearer light. You have two players of the same kind who are going up, and the defense is completely left without any coverage. It's a problem. But how do you leave Pedri out? Especially if he's not injured, if he's back, how do you leave him out? We possibly also have to take a very deep look at squad planning and how the squad was planned. I think we missed a bus there. I think we got what we could get. I think we got Felix, we got Cancelo, we got Oriol, we got Gundogan, and we took them because obviously these are names and you need those because of their quality or what they can bring. But looking at this, I would say if you look into their qualities or what they like doing or what they have done consistently over the years and where they would have the maximum impact, not that difficult to understand why we are struggling.
Yes, and I agree. I agree. The profiles are not ideal. So we have managed to plug some holes, but there are still holes. And with that, I would like to move on to the next example. Now, considering the current form of players and their importance in this team and the quality of those players, Barcelona need to have the best players on the pitch at the same time, right? That's what they need at the moment. And that goes for form and quality and importance of value, all of that. And if we're doing that in terms of the midfield, we need to have Frenkie, Gundogan, and Pedri. At the moment, these are your three best midfielders, without Gavi in the picture, of course, because he's sadly injured. Now, I've already explained why you can't have Pedri down here and then Gundogan up there, which would be more ideal. It would be the better option because of Gundogan's attacking instincts. But we'll explain how Pedri and Frenkie in this double pivot wouldn't necessarily provide you with what you need to have, right? So you put Pedri up there in the sort of a number 10 role, which we have seen from Xavi. And I feel like even though it's suboptimal, Xavi's hand might have been forced slightly in this scenario where he has to put Pedri up top. And this can still work, but then Frenkie and Gundogan need to stay compact, and Barcelona need to be they need to protect them much better. They need to have a much more solid rest defense, and they need to be compact at all times, which is a problem because we've seen that they don't really necessarily always do that well. Now Pedri would have this license up here, and he can be the player in the final third, and we've seen him do it. And the way you compensate for this lack of output that we're seeing currently is you have someone like Felix invert next to Pedri in this role, and you have someone like Cancelo who can potentially either be more centrally, provide the compactness, and potentially even push Gundogan higher, or you can have Cancelo in his role right here in the half space where he can be the extra creator next to Pedri and next to Felix, and that way you maybe have players between these lines. So in this area right here between the lines, you have three very impactful players, at least on paper, who can then create and provide the attacking output that Barca needs. So in this structure, you have three very decisive players on paper who need to be giving you more. They just need to be doing much more in offense. And I think that at the moment is what's slowing this Barcelona down. Frenkie and Gundogan are not the ideal partnership, but you need Frenkie because he is just the main receiver. He is someone who can connect these two lines, so the back line and the midfield line, and then move the ball forward. You just need him there. And Gundogan is someone who can be the retainer and the recycler. He's not the most athletic player, but he can be the horizontal presence who can also mimic these very progressive and advanced passes into the final third. If you limit the space that he needs to cover, he can perform this role. But again, you need to make sure that this double pivot has enough protection, enough of a safety net behind them. And that's why maybe Cancelo wouldn't push so high up, but he would rather be a player who's inside, who's closer to the deeper areas, and can provide that compactness and that safety net for the players in this line. Again, not ideal in terms of profiles. This is not the perfect blend of profiles that Barca need, but at the moment, it's putting your best players on the pitch and trying to make it work somehow. Again, the number 9 here, it can be Ferran Torres, it can be Lewandowski. We know it's going to be Lewandowski more often than not. Is that ideal? Again, not ideal. But in theory, if you have these three players behind him, there should not be much need for him to drop all the way here and try and play make from deeper areas. Again, now Lamine and Rafinha, the choice between them, Lamine will be the preferred one, but also he shouldn't be the preferred one all the time. So you have to make sure that those are rotated. And that's basically what the realistic approach, in my mind at least, looks like, at least on paper.
This is our Gala 11, right? And the problem is, with the best players that we have in our disposal at this moment, if we put them on a pitch, it actually creates a suboptimal midfield experience. Because however you put it, Frenkie and Gundogan are not a great double pivot combination. They can possibly do it because of their experience, but they're just not cut out for that. Number one, Pedri, he's a great player, but I don't think he's a 10 yet. Maybe he will become one. Nobody knows. So now you have three players who, on paper, individually are incredible players, but within this system, they're suboptimal. And thereby the output they create is suboptimal, whereby the whole team then starts to suffer.
As you said, in terms of names and just pure quality as individuals, top notch. These players just if you look at the names, they are very good. But it's not optimal. It's not an optimal blend of profiles, and you're missing things. You're still missing things. And that's a problem. That is a big problem. And there are ways to fix it. There are ways to fix it. Of course, it will require big reshuffles of the team. And that's what I would like to. The final example that we'll use is I will show you how you can have Pedri and Frenkie on the same in the same lineup, but it will be a drastic change. Okay, so final example, as alluded to, the most drastic of examples, and this will require some tinkering. I think Barcelona would need to make several drastic changes, but then again, desperate times, desperate measures, all of that. First of all, I'll just walk you through this squad because there's a lot here. First of all, Barca would need a new number 6. Secondly, we need a left back who can also tuck in and play as a left center back. If I had to mention a name that can do it right now in the squad, it would be someone like Mikael Faye, for example, or even Mika Marmol. I'm a big fan of Mika Marmol. I think Barca still have some sort of a clause with him, or is it? Yeah, so he can be recalled, for example. Mika Marmol would be the ideal even because he can be the left back moving forward. He can also be a left center back, and that's the requirement here. Now, thirdly, you need a natural left winger because this player right here wouldn't necessarily be an overlapping presence. He would be more of a left back / left center back, as you can see here. Next, Balde would have to be converted as the right winger. You know this was coming, but I just can't miss this opportunity to put Balde on the right wing. It can be someone else. If you don't want Balde there, it can be someone else, right? But he has to be a right winger. It can be Lamine, it can be Rafinha, but then in that case, you don't have Balde on the pitch. You have Balde on the bench. So if you don't want to bench him, in this scenario, he has to play there. So pick your poison. Either bench him or play on the right wing. In this scenario, as alluded to, you get Frenkie and Pedri on the pitch at the same time, and they can also do what they love to do. Why? Both will be highly involved in everything. They can both roam, and they can both do what they like to do. Frenkie can still go all the way down, and he can go all the way up. So Frenkie's zone of influence would basically be this half space right here would be where he would be most effective. And Pedri as well. He can be a deeper presence if needed because he likes to do that, but he can also push forward and be the attacking presence, which we know that he also does. And I'll just put the same area for him, although Frenkie would obviously have a bigger presence as the main receiver, the first progressor in this back line. Now, the fun part is the number 6 in this role. So out of possession, in a more stable, let's say it's a back four. It's not a back four, but in a back line, he would be as part of that left center back role. But in possession, what he would do, he would actually carry the ball. He would be here as the number 6, and his task, his job would be to stay here. This is the most important thing. He moves up and he stays there. He keeps this position behind these two players. And now this player right here on the left needs to be comfortable playing as a center back. The left back needs to be able to slot here and retain the back 3 formation for that extra shielding. Now, Frenkie can still drop deeper and assist the progression and be that John Stones in possession if he needs to be, if he wants to be, and then move forward. And especially with Cancelo here, who is out of place, but you have him in different roles. You have him invert into midfield and retain the compactness. If both of these players, let's say Frenkie and Pedri, want to move up, you can have Cancelo invert right here, and you still retain this shield of 5 players and Xavi's box if he wants to have that box again. Or you can have Cancelo out wide and provide the support to Balde or whoever the right winger is, and then you have him create this triangle that we know that he likes to create between the winger and the midfielder, who's number 8, who's going through the half space and connecting with the forward. So in this scenario, you basically have your best players on the pitch, or 6. Of course, there's a caveat of Balde having to be converted or benched. So that's the big thing here. That's obviously a big change. It's drastic. It's a lot to take in, right? It's not as simple as, okay, you put this out there and it just works. It needs to be coached. It needs to be properly executed. And it does seem too drastic at a certain level. I understand why people will be like, okay, this is a bit too much. But again, drastic, desperate times, desperate measures. And I feel this is a good way for Barcelona to get their best players on the pitch while also having a good blend of profiles. So I'll just end it there and just keep it at that for now. There needs to be a lot of changes for this to work, and you need a natural left winger here, who we don't really have, obviously. But yeah, this would be how I would get the most out of Frenkie and the most out of Pedri while having a quite a balanced midfield at the same time.
We have a profile issue and a formation issue, and that is reflecting back into the way the team is playing, where they seem disjointed and not having a very clear idea about how they need to play or what they need to do when facing challenges during a game. They just seem to run out of ideas on finding solutions, right? And it's pretty evident why that's happening.
This team is far from complete, and more likely than not, it will take several more transfer windows to get where we need to get to actually say, okay, this team now has what it needs to be elite, whatever that elite word means, right?
There you go. That's us taking a look at the midfield, trying to go deeper into the data. This is obviously a longer episode because it's a complex topic. We will do it into a series. We started with the midfield. We will do the same with the defense, and we'll do the same with the forward line in trying to understand and decipher where we're going wrong and what are the possible solutions that we might have or what we might have to plan for in the next 2 seasons for us to translate from on paper being good to actually being good on the pitch, to having people who have the right profiles, who have the right kind of associated play, who complement each other to build a much more competitive team, which can create better football. So with that, Visca Barca, and see you on the next one.